Investigators studying the burn patterns couldn't understand what they were seeing. The fire had moved upward at impossible speeds, faster than any known flame propagation model could explain. The char marks defied physics. Until Dr. Richard Fennell built a scale model and discovered a phenomenon that had never been documented in fire science, something they would name the trench effect. A quirk of geometry and fluid dynamics that turned an ordinary escalator into a chimney of death. King's Cross Station. November 18, 1987. The ticket hall was crowded with evening commuters, passengers streaming between platforms, tourists consulting maps, staff directing traffic through one of London's biggest transport hubs. Below them, in the machine rooms and escalator shafts, decades of accumulated grease coated every surface. Thick, black, waiting. Station staff had reported 87 small fires in the previous years. 87 warnings. Each one dismissed, each one extinguished before serious damage occurred. Management called them alarmist, said the wooden escalators were perfectly safe, that passengers wouldn't tolerate the disruption of replacement. They were wrong. What happened that November evening would kill 31 people, destroy one of London's most important transport nodes, and reveal a gap in human understanding of fire behavior so profound that every safety manual in the world would need rewriting. But more than that, it would expose an institutional culture where warnings from working-class staff were systematically ignored by management who valued operational continuity over passenger safety. The transformation from dismissed concern to validated catastrophe took less than 15 minutes. This is the story of the King's Cross fire. King's Cross St Pancras station had served London since 1852. By 1987, it was one of the busiest interchanges in the Underground network. 6 different lines converged there: the Metropolitan, Circle, Hammersmith and City, Northern, Piccadilly, Victoria. On an average day, more than 200,000 passengers moved through its corridors and escalators. The station's wooden escalators were relics of another era. Some dated back to the 1920s, constructed from pitch pine and oak. They had been built when fire safety meant having buckets of sand nearby. The mechanisms underneath accumulated decades of grease, lubricating oil, dirt, fiber debris from clothing and newspapers. It formed a combustible sludge in the machinery spaces, thick as tar in some places. Station supervisor Derek Smith had worked at King's Cross for 23 years. He knew every passage, every machine room, every escalator. And he knew about the grease. He'd reported it multiple times, written memos to management, requested deep cleaning, requested replacement of the wooden escalators. His concerns were filed, noted, ignored. Smith would later testify at the inquiry, quote, "I told them we were sitting on a tinderbox. I used those exact words, tinderbox. They said we couldn't afford the disruption, that we'd managed for decades without incident. They asked me if I wanted to be responsible for the chaos of closing escalators during rush hour. He wasn't. But what made these escalators truly dangerous was something nobody understood yet. The Piccadilly line escalator number 4 was 156 feet long. It climbed at a 30-degree angle from the platform level to the ticket hall. Passengers standing on it would ascend for about 2 minutes, watching the white-tiled walls slide past. Advertisements for West End shows, Phantom of the Opera, Les Miserables. Warning notices about standing still, holding the handrail. Beneath the moving staircase, In the dark spaces under the steps, the grease lay waiting. Maintenance worker Paul Galway had cleaned sections of that escalator. He'd seen how thick the grease was. Quote, "You could stick your finger in and it'd go down 2 inches. Solid grease, mixed with dirt and fiber. It was like axle grease, everywhere under those steps. We joked about it being a fire hazard, but it was a dark joke. We never imagined it could be this bad." Station officer Colin Townsley of the London Fire Brigade had worked in the area for years. He knew King's Cross well, the cramped corridors, the maze of passages connecting different lines, the way smoke could fill those spaces. He'd attended small fires there before, nothing serious, smouldering rubbish bins, electrical faults, small grease fires on escalators that were quickly extinguished. His wife, Maggie Townsley, would later recall their last conversation. Quote, "He kissed me goodbye that evening, same as always. Said he'd be home by midnight. His shift ended at 10, but there was always paperwork, always something. He was wearing his uniform. Proud. He loved the job. Loved helping people. That's who he was. A man who ran toward danger while others ran away." He had no idea that before the night ended, he would become the only firefighter to die in a peacetime underground station fire in London's history. Police Constable Stephen Hanson was on duty at King's Cross that evening. Walking his beat through the ticket hall, checking that everything ran smoothly. It was his routine, same as any other Wednesday. He'd worked the transport beat for 6 years, knew the station staff, the regular commuters, the troublemakers to watch. At approximately 7:29 p.m., a passenger approached him. The passenger was agitated, a businessman named Mark Silver, returning from a meeting in the city. He'd just come up the Piccadilly line escalator and noticed flames. Small flames. Coming from underneath the steps, visible through the gaps between the treads. Silver would later describe the moment to BBC reporters. Quote, "I saw these little flames, dancing under the steps, like candle flames. I thought it was odd, strange, but not, I didn't think people were going to die. I just thought someone should know. So I found a policeman. I wish I'd made more of a fuss. Pulled the fire alarm. Screamed. Something." PC Hanson immediately went to investigate, following Silver back down to the escalator. What he saw seemed minor. A small fire burning in the grease and debris under the moving steps, visible through the gaps. But small, contained. Nothing that appeared immediately life-threatening. This was the critical moment. The moment when the fire was still controllable, still stoppable. But nobody understood yet what was happening underneath. Hanson alerted station staff. Inspector Peter Osborne responded. They hit the emergency stop button. The escalator ground to a halt. Passengers still on it stumbled slightly as the movement ceased, looked around confused. Were told to walk up, keep moving, nothing to worry about. They tried using water fire extinguishers on the flames. Hanson and Osborne took turns, aiming through the gaps in the steps. The water hissed as it hit the flames, steam rose. But the fire barely diminished. The water ran off the grease, couldn't penetrate, couldn't suppress. Station procedures called for evacuation in case of fire. But the flames seemed contained. Passengers were still using the other escalators, still moving through the station. The evening rush was in full flow. Nobody wanted to cause panic over what appeared to be a minor incident. This decision, to allow the station to keep operating, would haunt the survivors forever. Station foreman Christopher Hayes arrived within minutes. He was the senior man on duty, responsible for operational decisions. He assessed the situation, the small fire still burning under the stopped escalator, the water extinguishers proving ineffective. He made the call. Contact the fire brigade. At 7:34 p.m., 5 minutes after Mark Silver first reported the flames, the emergency call went through to Soho Fire Station. But those 5 minutes mattered. Underground, invisible to everyone watching, the fire was spreading. The flames traveled along the grease deposits under the escalator, moving upward, slowly at first, then faster. Following the accumulated fuel, finding gaps in the structure, following channels worn by decades of use. The wooden structure of the escalator itself began to catch. The pitch pine, rich with resin, 60 years of wood grain dried by the underground's warm air. It started to smolder, then burn. Passengers continued using the station. Some noticed smoke now, wisps of grey smoke drifting from the Piccadilly line escalators. They asked staff what was happening. Were told it was under control, a small fire being dealt with, keep moving, nothing to worry about, head to your platform, mind the gap. Student nurse Jill Lancelot was heading home after her shift at University College Hospital. She entered King's Cross through the main entrance, noticed smoke in the ticket hall. Quote, I remember thinking it smelled like burning wood, like a bonfire. But it was November, maybe someone had a bonfire outside. It didn't occur to me it was inside the station. I went to the ticket window, bought my ticket. The clerk seemed normal, not panicked, so I thought everything was fine. I headed down to the Northern Line. That decision saved my life. Musician Richard Cotter was heading home after teaching music lessons in Islington. He entered the Piccadilly line platform, noticed smoke hanging in the air, thicker than Lancelot had seen upstairs. He thought it odd but not alarming. London Underground stations always had peculiar smells, dust, brake fluid, electrical burning. This seemed like more of the same. He boarded his train, it departed, carrying him away from what was about to unfold. He would later describe himself as one of the lucky ones. At 7:36 p.m., the first fire appliances arrived. Station officer Colin Townsley and his crew from Soho blew 2 pump. 4 firefighters in total: Townsley, Geoffrey Davies, Charles Whitelock, Colin Hayes. They'd received the call as a small fire on an escalator, standard response. Nothing in the call suggested what they were about to face. They grabbed their equipment and headed down into the station. Breathing apparatus, hose lines, axes. Following station staff to the Piccadilly line escalators, down the corridors, past the ticket barriers, into the warren of passengers. What Townsley saw had deteriorated rapidly. The fire was now burning along a significant length of the escalator. Flames erupting from multiple points, visible through the steps. The heat intensifying, black smoke pouring upward, filling the escalator shaft, rolling across the ceiling. He immediately called for backup. Made pumps 4, the code for requesting 3 additional fire engines. His voice was calm, professional, but urgent. The fire was beyond what a single crew could handle. Then he and his crew began their attack. Dragging hose lines down the escalator, into the smoke, into the heat. Standard procedure, get water on the seat of the fire, knock it down before it spreads. Station Officer Townsley had fought fires for 23 years. House fires, car fires, industrial fires. He knew fire behavior, knew how flames spread, how smoke moved, how structures failed. But he had never seen anything like what was about to happen. Meanwhile, in the ticket hall above, passengers continued their journeys, most unaware of the growing emergency below. The smoke was visible now, more than wisps, actual clouds of grey-black smoke wafting up from the escalator shafts. People noticed, started pointing, asking questions. But still nobody had ordered a full evacuation. British Transport Police Officer Richard Kelsall was in the ticket hall. He could see the smoke getting thicker, people starting to worry. He moved to begin directing passengers away from the affected areas, toward the exits. But it was gentle, polite, perhaps use the other exit, bit of smoke over there. Not the urgent evacuation that was needed. The escalators from other lines were still running. Still bringing passengers up into the ticket hall, delivering them into a space that was rapidly filling with smoke. From the Victoria Line, the Northern Line, the Metropolitan Line. Hundreds of people streaming upward. Into danger. Commuter Andrew Boyce emerged from the Victoria Line escalator at 7:40 p.m. Into the ticket hall, into smoke that was now thick enough to sting his eyes. Quote, "The smoke was everywhere. You could barely see across the hall. People were coughing, looking confused. I saw a police officer but he didn't seem. There was no sense of emergency, no alarm. I decided to leave quickly. Get out. I walked fast to the exit. When I got outside and turned around, the smoke was pouring from the entrance, like a chimney. I knew something terrible was happening." Freelance journalist James Melville was waiting at the taxi rank outside the main entrance on Euston Road. He was heading to an assignment. Noticed people emerging from the exits, coughing, smoke-stained, looking shocked, moving quickly, some stumbling. He approached them, asked what was happening. They described chaos below. Smoke, thick smoke, confusion, no clear instructions, people pushing to get out. Melville grabbed his camera from his bag, the professional instinct kicking in. This was a story. Started documenting what would become one of London's worst disasters. His photographs would appear on front pages worldwide. At 7:42 p.m., 12 minutes after Mark Silver first reported flames, something changed. The fire had been spreading along the escalator, growing, intensifying, the heat building, the smoke thickening, the wooden structure burning more intensely. But it had remained essentially a fire on an escalator. Dangerous but containable. The kind of fire that firefighters knew how to fight: bring enough water, enough personnel, knock it down, overhaul the scene. Then the physics took over. The escalator shaft acted as a chimney. The angle of the escalator, 30 degrees, created a channel for the hot gases. As the fire burned, it heated the air. Hot air rises, basic thermodynamics. The smoke and superheated gases began flowing upward along the ceiling of the escalator tunnel, following the path of least resistance. This created a feedback effect. The hot gases heated the ceiling, the walls, the escalator structure itself. As these surfaces heated, they began to pyrolyze, breaking down chemically without actually burning. The wood releasing combustible gases, the paint releasing vapors, the grease vaporizing. These gases mixed with the rising hot air, creating a river of fuel flowing upward. Invisible, deadly. And the angle mattered. At 30 degrees, the flow of hot gases created a zone of intense heat that traveled along the escalator ceiling, moving faster than the actual flames, preheating everything in its path, turning the entire escalator shaft into a primed explosive device. A bomb waiting for ignition. This was the trench effect. But in 1987, nobody knew it existed. No fire engineer, no safety specialist, no researcher. It wasn't in any textbook, any computer model, any building code. At approximately 7:43 p.m., the trench effect reached its conclusion. The superheated gases flowing along the escalator ceiling reached the ticket hall. They emerged from the escalator shaft like a blowtorch, like a flamethrower, like the breath of a dragon. The temperature in that zone exceeded 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything in their path instantly ignited. The wooden escalator structure exploded into flames. Not gradually, not spreading from one point to another, but all at once. Simultaneously. The entire escalator becoming a single massive fire. The flashover was instant, devastating, total. Survivor Michael Watts was purchasing a ticket at the window when it happened. Quote, "There was smoke, then suddenly, it wasn't smoke anymore, it was fire. A wall of fire that just appeared. It rolled across the ceiling, like a wave, like something from a movie, except it was real. The heat hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe, couldn't see. People were screaming. I ran, just ran, toward where I thought the exit was, bouncing off walls. Other people. I don't know how I found the way out. When I got outside, my eyebrows were singed. My coat was smoking." The ticket hall transformed from a smoke-filled but navigable space into an inferno in seconds. Literally seconds. Eyewitnesses would later describe it as a wave of fire, a wall of flame that simply appeared, erupting from the escalator shaft, rolling across the ceiling, consuming everything. The ceiling tiles, the advertising hoardings, the wooden ticket booths. The passengers. People caught in the ticket hall died where they stood. Station officer Colin Townsley was on the escalator with his crew when the flashover occurred. They were directly in the path of the superheated gases. There was no time to react, no time to retreat, no time to hit the ground. No time for anything. The heat was instantly lethal. Townsley and firefighter Colin Hayes died immediately. Their breathing apparatus couldn't protect him from temperatures that melted glass, warped steel, turned concrete into dust. Two other firefighters with him, Jeffrey Davies and Charles Whitelock, were severely burned but survived. They managed to crawl back down the escalator, away from the flames, dragging themselves through the heat, through the smoke. Their protective gear smoking, their skin blistering underneath. Other firefighters arriving with the backup crews found them, dragged them to safety, began immediate treatment. Both men would spend months in hospital, undergoing skin grafts, painful rehabilitation, multiple surgeries. But they lived. Unlike their station officer. Unlike Colin Hayes. In the ticket hall, passengers and staff were engulfed. Police Constable Stephen Hansen, the first responder who had investigated Mark Silver's initial report, was in the ticket hall when the flashover occurred. He was attempting to help passengers evacuate, directing them toward exits, maintaining calm, doing his job. The wall of fire caught him. He suffered severe burns, 30% of his body, third-degree burns on his hands, his face, his neck. He collapsed. Was dragged from the ticket hall by other officers. He would survive but spend months recovering, multiple surgeries, skin grafts, permanent scarring. He would never return to police work. The physical injuries healed. The psychological ones never fully did. Others were not so fortunate. The fire spread with terrifying speed. The wooden ticket booths ignited, the ceiling tiles, advertisement hoardings. Everything combustible became fuel. The heat was so intense that metal structures began to warp, support beams bending, glass shattering, concrete cracking, expanding and contracting in the heat. The smoke turned black and toxic. Filled with carbon monoxide, hydrogen cyanide from burning plastics, particles of unburned fuel. Breathing it was like inhaling poison. One lungful could render someone unconscious. 2 could kill. Many victims died not from burns but from smoke inhalation. Overcome by toxic gases before the flames reached them. They collapsed, lost consciousness, never woke up. Their bodies found later, relatively unburned. Killed by invisible gas. Musician Richard Cotter's sister, Marion Fallon, was not so lucky. She had entered the station minutes after her brother departed, heading to visit friends. She was in the ticket hall when the flashover occurred. Caught in the center, no escape route. She was one of the 31 who died. Spanish tourist Antonio Basualdo was traveling with his wife Rosa. They'd spent the day sightseeing, Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, the Tower of London. They entered King's Cross to return to their hotel. They never left. Both died in the ticket hall. Their families in Madrid learning of the tragedy from television news. Freelance journalist James Melville, outside with his camera, watched as smoke began pouring from every entrance. Not the grey smoke from before, but dense black smoke. Thick as oil, thick enough to block light. People were running from the exits now. Some with clothing on fire, others helping burned victims, carrying them, dragging them, supporting them. Melville's photographs captured the horror. One image shows a man emerging from the entrance, his coat smoking, his face blackened, his expression blank with shock. Another shows firefighters carrying a victim. Another shows smoke so thick it looks solid, pouring from the station entrance like water from a dam. The taxi rank became a triage area. Drivers helping, using their first aid kits, laying victims on the pavement, giving water, calling for ambulances. Fire crews continued to arrive. Within 15 minutes of Townsley's initial call, 20 fire engines were on scene. More than 100 firefighters. They came from across London, Soho, Euston, Clerkenwell, Manchester Square, Knightsbridge. Every available unit responding. They worked to evacuate passengers from the lower platforms, from the trains stopped in the tunnels, from the connecting passages and corridors. The underground network beneath King's Cross was a maze. And it was filling with smoke. Sub-Officer Colin Townsley, no relation to the station officer who had died, led his crew through the Victoria Line tunnels. Quote, "The smoke was incredible. even with breathing apparatus. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. We followed the tracks, calling out. We found people wandering, lost, confused. Some had come up from platforms, found smoke, gone back down, didn't know which way was out. We led them through the tunnels, used the track beds to bypass the burning sections. Some had to walk a mile underground to reach safety. Firefighters found survivors huddled in alcoves, in equipment rooms, on platforms. Some unconscious from smoke inhalation. They carried them, gave oxygen, administered first aid in darkness lit only by torches and emergency lights. Meanwhile, the fire above continued its destruction. The ticket hall was an inferno. Impossible to enter. Firefighters attacked from the edges, pouring water into the flames from Euston Road, from the entrances. But the intensity was overwhelming. The heat drove them back repeatedly. They could hear the structure failing, metal groaning, concrete cracking. The distinctive sounds of a building dying. Assistant Sub-Officer John Robinson commanded firefighting operations at the main entrance. Quote, "We couldn't get in. The heat was pushing us back. We'd advance, pour water in. The heat would intensify, drive us back. We knew people were inside, knew we had to get to them. But we couldn't. The fire was too intense, too hot. We kept trying, every few minutes, another push, another attempt. But the heat, I've fought fires for 15 years. I'd never seen heat like that." The famous King's Cross sign above the entrance, a landmark that had stood for decades, an Art Deco masterpiece, a symbol of London transport, it crashed down into Euston Road. Flaming debris raining onto the pavement, firefighters scattering. The metal framework glowing red, warping, collapsing. BBC television interrupted normal programming at 8:15 p.m. News anchor Michael Burke appeared on screen. Quote, "We're receiving reports of a major fire at King's Cross Underground Station in central London. Early reports suggest there are casualties. The station has been evacuated. Fire crews are at the scene. We'll bring you more information as we receive it. We now return to our scheduled programming." But by 8:30, the scheduled programs were abandoned. Coverage became continuous. Cameras arrived at the scene, broadcasting live images of smoke pouring from one of London's most important transport hubs. By 9 p.m., the scale was becoming clear. News anchor Martin Lewis reported, quote, "We're now being told that the fire at King's Cross is being treated as a major incident. Ambulances have transported numerous casualties to hospitals across London. The Royal Free, St. Thomas, University College Hospital. The exact number of casualties is not yet known, but we're hearing reports of fatalities. The station remains closed. The fire is still burning. We'll continue to bring you updates throughout the evening." It took more than 4 hours to bring the fire under control. 4 hours of intense firefighting, hundreds of thousands of gallons of water poured into the inferno. Crews rotating, exhausted firefighters replaced by fresh crews. The battle continuing into the night. By midnight, firefighters could finally enter the ticket hall. What they found shocked even experienced officers. The devastation was total, complete, absolute. The wooden escalators reduced to charred remnants and twisted metal, barely recognizable as escalators. The ticket hall gutted, ceiling collapsed, walls blackened. Everything burned, melted, destroyed. And the bodies. The recovery operation began in the early hours of November 19th. Fire investigators, police, forensic teams. Working in the destroyed ticket hall, identifying victims, documenting the scene, photographing everything, measuring, recording. 31 people had died. Most in the ticket hall, some on the escalators, others in nearby passages. Many were burned beyond recognition. Identification would require dental records, personal effects, jewelry that survived the heat. Painstaking forensic work. Station officer Colin Townsley's body was found near the base of the escalator, where he had died trying to fight the fire. His breathing apparatus still on, still in position. He died doing his job, saving lives. He was 47 years old. A veteran firefighter, a husband, a father of two. A man who spent his life running toward danger. He would be awarded a posthumous Queen's Gallantry Medal. His funeral was attended by hundreds. Fellow firefighters, police officers, government officials. The fire brigade in full dress uniform, the procession through London. Sirens silent, lights flashing. A final tribute. His wife Maggie spoke to reporters. Quote, Colin died doing what he believed in, helping people, saving lives. He wouldn't have run. That wasn't who he was. But he shouldn't have died. Those escalators should have been replaced years ago. The warnings were there. He died because someone chose to ignore them. I want people to remember that. The youngest victim was just 19. Simon Halaby, a student at Imperial College, heading home after studying in the library. His parents identified him by his watch. Everything else burned beyond recognition. The oldest was 81. Frida Thompson, returning from visiting her daughter in Highgate. She'd used King's Cross for 60 years, since before the war. She knew every passage, every platform. The smoke confused her. She went the wrong way. Into the ticket hall. Into the flames. They were commuters, tourists, students, workers. Ordinary people going about ordinary journeys. Business people returning from meetings, shoppers heading home with parcels, theater goers planning their evening. More than 100 others were injured, many severely. Burns, smoke inhalation, trauma, broken bones from falls, crushed by crowds. Some would never fully recover. Chronic lung damage from smoke, psychological trauma, nightmares, panic attacks in confined spaces, in underground stations. But the questions began immediately. How did this happen? Why did a small fire escalate so catastrophically? Why was the station not evacuated? What had gone wrong? Why were the wooden escalators still in use? Why hadn't the warnings been heeded? The Department of Transport ordered a public inquiry. Led by Desmond Fennell QC, a barrister with experience in major accident investigations. His mandate was comprehensive. Examine every aspect of the fire, determine causes, make recommendations, prevent future tragedies. If you're finding this account revealing, consider subscribing. These preventable tragedies deserve to be remembered. The lessons they teach must not be forgotten. The Fennell inquiry began hearing evidence in February 1988. It would last months. Calling hundreds of witnesses, examining thousands of documents. Technical reports, fire brigade records, London Underground internal communications, maintenance logs, safety audits, staff testimonies, survivor accounts, expert analysis. What emerged was damning. A portrait of institutional failure, systemic negligence, cultural complacency. London Underground had known about the fire risk for decades. The 87 previous fires on escalators were documented. Every single one. Dates, times, locations, causes, responses. Noted in safety meetings, filed in reports, known to management. Station supervisor Derek Smith testified, his voice shaking with anger. Quote, I reported the grease buildup, I reported small fires, I used the word tinderbox, I wasn't being dramatic, I was being accurate, I asked for deep cleaning, I asked for escalator replacement, I was told it wasn't in the budget, I was told the disruption would be unacceptable, I was told to stop being an alarmist. Well, 31 people are dead. Who's the alarmist now? Staff had repeatedly raised concerns. Fire safety officers had recommended replacing the wooden escalators, improving fire detection systems, better evacuation procedures, installing sprinklers, upgrading materials to non-combustible alternatives. All of these warnings were dismissed or delayed. Internal documents revealed the reasoning. Management prioritized operational continuity. Replacing escalators meant disruption, closing sections of the station, reducing passenger capacity, inconveniencing commuters. The cost was considered too high. The risk too theoretical. One memo from 1985, presented at the inquiry, stated, quote, while we acknowledge the theoretical risk of fire on wooden escalators, the practical risk remains minimal. We have managed these assets successfully for decades. The cost of replacement would be approximately £40 million. The disruption to services would be unacceptable. The small fires that have occurred were all successfully contained. We recommend continued vigilance and prompt response to any incidents, but do not recommend replacement at this time. £40 million. To replace escalators that killed 31 people. After all, there had never been a major fire. The small fires had always been extinguished. The wooden escalators had been there for decades without serious incident. Why change a system that appeared to work? Why spend money preventing something that had never happened? This was the fatal complacency, the deadly assumption. The belief that because something hasn't happened, it won't happen. The inquiry discovered that London Underground's safety culture was fundamentally broken. There was no unified command structure for emergencies. Station staff were not trained in fire evacuation procedures. Nobody had clear responsibility for ordering evacuation, no protocols for when to evacuate versus when to maintain operations. Fire detection systems were primitive or non-existent in many areas. Some escalators had no detection at all, others had systems so old they barely functioned. False alarms were common, real alarms were sometimes ignored. Fire brigade access was complicated by the station's layout. Narrow passages, multiple levels, confusing interconnections, dead ends, locked doors. Firefighters arriving at the scene had inadequate information about what was burning where. Station staff couldn't provide clear guidance, didn't know the extent, didn't understand the danger. Communication between the fire brigade and underground staff was poor. Different radio systems, different terminologies, different chains of command. The fire brigade expected underground staff to provide tactical information, underground staff expected the fire brigade to take command. Nobody was in charge. But the most shocking discovery came from the technical investigation into why the fire spread so catastrophically. Fire scientists studied the burn patterns, examined the char marks on surviving structures, reviewed eyewitness testimony. They couldn't explain what they were seeing. The fire had behaved in ways that contradicted established fire dynamics. Flame spread velocities that exceeded theoretical maximums, heat distribution that made no sense, damage patterns that defied modeling. Dr. Richard Fennell, the barrister leading the inquiry, working with fire science experts from around the world, commissioned experimental work. They built a scale model of the escalator. 1/3 size. Accurately representing the angle, the dimensions, the materials, the geometry. They set fires on the model. And they discovered the trench effect. The experiments showed that as fire burns on an inclined surface, the hot gases flow upward along the ceiling. Basic physics. But at certain angles, particularly around 30 degrees, this creates a feedback loop. The flowing gases preheat the surface ahead of the flames. The preheated surface releases combustible gases through pyrolysis. These gases add fuel to the flow, which intensifies the heating, which releases more gases, which intensifies the flow. It's exponential, self-reinforcing, accelerating. At a critical point, the entire channel simultaneously reaches ignition temperature. And the flashover occurs. Not gradually, not predictably, but suddenly, violently, with explosive force. The experiments recorded flame spread velocities that exceeded anything in the fire science literature. The fire moving up the model escalator at speeds that shouldn't be possible. 10 times faster than predicted by conventional models, 20 times faster. The flames racing up the inclined channel like water flowing downhill. This was completely unknown to fire safety engineering in 1987. Nobody designing fire safety systems had accounted for the trench effect. Because nobody knew it existed. It wasn't in the textbooks, wasn't in the computer models, wasn't in the building codes, wasn't in the design standards. King's Cross was the experiment that revealed it. Dr. David Rasbash, professor of fire safety engineering at Edinburgh University, testified. Quote, "The trench effect represents a fundamental gap in our understanding of fire dynamics. We have designed countless buildings, transit systems, escalators, without accounting for this phenomenon. Because we didn't know. King's Cross taught us, at a terrible cost. But now we know, now we can design for it, now we can prevent it. That knowledge was purchased with 31 lives." The Fennell report, published in November 1988, was unsparing. 157 recommendations. Fundamental changes to London Underground's operations, changes to fire safety regulations nationwide, changes that would ripple around the world. All wooden escalators must be replaced. No exceptions, no delays, no excuses. This would cost hundreds of millions of pounds, take years to complete, disrupt millions of passenger journeys. But it was non-negotiable. New fire detection systems throughout the network. Heat sensors, smoke detectors, flame detectors, linked to central control, monitored continuously. Automatic fire suppression systems. Sprinklers, deluge systems, on escalators and in machine rooms, water mist systems in sensitive areas. Complete evacuation procedures. Clear protocols, staff training, regular drills, designated assembly points, emergency lighting, clear signage. Improved communication systems. Integration between underground staff and emergency services, compatible radio systems, joint training exercises. A unified command structure. Clear chains of responsibility, designated incident commanders, decision-making authority. CCTV coverage throughout stations. Monitoring for early fire detection, recording for investigation. And fundamentally, a culture change. Safety must take priority over operational convenience. Staff concerns must be taken seriously. Warning signs must be investigated, not dismissed, not minimized, not ignored. The report explicitly criticized London Underground's management. Their complacency, their failure to act on warnings, their prioritization of operations over safety, their dismissal of staff concerns, their false economy of saving money at the expense of lives. The political response was swift. Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher addressed Parliament. Quote, "This tragedy must never be repeated. We will implement every recommendation of the Fennell report. We will provide whatever funding is necessary, whatever time is required. The safety of the travelling public is paramount. London Underground will be rebuilt to the highest safety standards in the world." The government accepted all recommendations. Provided funding, demanded implementation, oversight, progress reports, accountability. The Queen sent a message of condolence to the families. Quote, "Prince Philip and I were deeply shocked and saddened to learn of the terrible tragedy at King's Cross Station. Our hearts go out to all those who have lost loved ones, and to those who were injured. We commend the bravery of the firefighters and emergency services who responded. The entire nation mourns with you." London Underground began the massive program of escalator replacement. By 1995, every wooden escalator in the entire network had been replaced with metal and fireproof materials. The last one was removed from Wanstead Station. Ceremonially decommissioned, sent to a museum. The cost exceeded £1 billion. Fire safety systems were completely overhauled. The underground network received more than £300 million of safety improvements. Sprinklers, detection systems, emergency lighting, evacuation systems, communications infrastructure. But beyond London, the King's Cross fire changed fire safety worldwide. The discovery of the trench effect revolutionized how engineers designed escalators, transit systems, any inclined surface where fire might occur. Parking garage ramps, stadium seating, sloped walkways. Fire codes were rewritten. In Britain, in Europe, in America, in Asia. Computer models updated, engineering textbooks revised, building standards changed. Not just in Britain but globally. Every major transit system examined their escalators, their fire safety provisions. Many found the same vulnerabilities, the same wooden structures, the same grease accumulation, the same lack of detection, the same lack of suppression. Cities around the world launched replacement programs. New York, Paris, Moscow, Tokyo, Hong Kong. Every major metro system. Billions of dollars invested, millions of passenger journeys disrupted. But lives saved. The trench effect entered the vocabulary of fire science. It's now taught in every fire safety engineering course, modeled in every fire simulation, accounted for in every safety design. Students learn about King's Cross, study the burn patterns, calculate the flame spread velocities, design systems to prevent it. King's Cross became a case study. Not just in fire dynamics, but in organizational failure. How institutions ignore warnings, how complacency kills. How the voices of working-class staff, those who saw the dangers daily, were systematically dismissed by management who never encountered those dangers themselves. Who made decisions from comfortable offices, who valued budgets over lives, who chose convenience over safety. The families of the victims campaigned for years. For recognition, for accountability, for change. They formed the King's Cross Family Support Group, met with politicians, testified at inquiries, ensured their loved ones were remembered. Marion Fallon's brother Richard Cotter became a prominent voice. Quote, "My sister died in a fire that could have been prevented, should have been prevented, would have been prevented if anyone had listened to the warnings. I don't want her death to be meaningless. I want it to mean that this never happens again. That's why I speak. That's why I campaign. So that 31 deaths purchase something valuable. Purchase change." Station officer Colin Townsley became a symbol of firefighter bravery. Remembered not just as a victim but as a hero who died trying to save others. The Fire Brigade honors his memory annually. A memorial service, a moment of silence. His sacrifice. A plaque was installed at King's Cross. Bronze, dignified, simple. It lists 31 names. Colin Townsley, station officer. Marion Fallon, teacher. Simon Halabi, student. Antonio and Rosa Basualdo, tourists. Frida Thompson, retiree. 26 others. Each a person, each a life, each a story cut short. The rebuilt King's Cross station opened in 2005. After a massive redevelopment. Modern, safe, beautiful. Glass and steel, natural light flooding spaces that were once dark. With fire safety systems that represent the lessons learned. That embody the knowledge purchased at such a terrible price. Sprinklers throughout, smoke detection everywhere, metal escalators, non-combustible materials, multiple evacuation routes, clear signage, emergency lighting, CCTV monitoring, trained staff, regular drills. The station now handles 90 million passengers per year. All moving through spaces designed with the knowledge of November 18, 1987. There's a memorial in the main concourse. Most passengers pass it without noticing. Hurrying to catch their trains, living their lives, working, studying, traveling. Which is as it should be. The memorial doesn't exist to make people stop. It exists to remind those with responsibility. Station managers, safety officers, engineers, politicians. That safety is never theoretical. That warnings matter. That complacency kills. That the small fires aren't small. They're warnings. The wooden escalators are gone. The fire procedures are rigorous. The detection systems are state-of-art. The staff are trained. The lessons learned. The changes implemented. But only because 31 people died to teach them. That's the mathematics of prevention. The calculus of catastrophe. Known dangers ignored until the statistics become unbearable. Until the theoretical becomes undeniable. until those with power can no longer look away. If this pattern disturbs you, if you believe institutional memory matters, a subscription helps keep these stories visible. November 18, 1987. 7:29 p.m. A dropped match. Decades of accumulated grease. And a phenomenon of physics nobody understood. 15 minutes later, 31 dead. More than 100 injured. And fire safety science forever changed. The next time you ride an escalator in a transit station, notice the metal construction. The sprinkler heads, the smoke detectors, the clear evacuation signs, the emergency lighting, the non-slip surfaces, the fireproof materials. They're there because of King's Cross. Because 87 warnings weren't enough. Because institutional complacency demanded a catastrophe before it would change. Because management valued budget over safety, until the bodies forced their hand. Because Dr. Richard Fennell built a model and discovered why the fire moved impossibly fast. Because Station Officer Colin Townsley died fighting flames that shouldn't have existed. Flames that existed only because wooden escalators weren't replaced. Because grease wasn't cleaned. Because warnings were dismissed. The trench effect, now it's a footnote in engineering textbooks. A solved problem, a known phenomenon. Students calculate it, engineers design against it, codes prevent it. But for the families of the 31, it's the reason their loved ones never came home. For Maggie Townsley, it's the reason she's a widow. For Richard Cotter, it's the reason his sister's chair is empty at Christmas. For Simon Hallaby's parents, it's the reason they visit a grave instead of watching their son graduate. That's the price of knowledge. That's the cost of institutional failure. That's what happens when warnings are dismissed as paranoia, until a dropped match proves them tragically, devastatingly, irreversibly correct. King's Cross Station. 7:29 p.m. November 18, 1987. The fire that rewrote fire science. And killed 31 people to do it. The memorial plaque is still there. Bronze letters. 31 names. Most people pass it without stopping. But it's there. Waiting. Reminding those who pause to read that safety regulations are written in blood. Every rule, every inspection, every sprinkler, every smoke detector. They exist because somewhere, sometime, people died without them.